Well, it took about 2 years to assemble this Antweight combat robot, so I figured it was about time to take it somewhere to see how it would perform in an actual event. A few weeks ago, I headed out to the west side of the state of Michigan to compete in the Michigan Mashup. This one here was actually the extra robot. It did not fight. This is the one that's all a little bit beaten up. This is the one that actually fought a few matches. And, well, things didn't go too bad for me. I ended up going 1 win, 2 losses. It was a double elimination tournament. So let's start by reviewing some of the matches. So my first opponent was a robot named Super Space Turtle. I'm pretty sure it was built by someone from the Shredder Bro team. They were handing out Shredder Bro poker chips. They had a whole bunch of these. Some kid took one and gave them to me. Sure, whatever. And then also he kind of looks like one of the guys on the BattleBots website's profile being part of Shredder Bro. So I'm assuming that's the team he fights for. But this little guy was a wedge bot of some sort. Didn't seem to have any normal active weapon, but is pretty quick. So in Michigan Mashup, they're 2-minute long matches, and with 45 seconds left, the pit opens. Now during the first half of the match, clearly he's a better driver than me, but I think we're doing pretty well going back and forth, just kind of outmaneuvering each other. And the moment the pit opens, 2 seconds later, he's got me pushed into the pit, and that was it. Like, wow, that ended in a hurry. But, you know, it was a good first match. It wasn't some destructive robot to rip everything apart the first time out, so I was kind of happy for that. Of course, being thrown in the pit is a loss for myself. Super Space Turtle will go on to eventually finish 4th place overall in the tournament, so he did pretty well as a neat little robot. One note from this particular battle, I'll talk a bit more later on, but the one side of the drive belt just randomly popped off, not from any combat damage. It just kind of popped up on its own, and that pertains to a bit of a weakness in my design that I will talk about in a little bit. Dropping down to the loser's bracket, I had to fight a robot called the Lawnmower of Chaos. It had an active weapon, it could do some damage, so I'm like, okay, let's just charge into this guy and just see what happens. And things went decently well for me. I was probably a little bit more ambitious than I should have been when I came back to look at the damage that the robot took, but it seemed like Nylon Brigade here was taking the hits pretty well. About, a minute or so into the fight, the opponent's weapon did stop working. I'm not entirely sure if that was something I did or it just hit me enough times that it finally stopped working, but this allowed me to actually get my weapon involved. And it did something. Was able to kind of pop the robot up, eventually flip it over, get it stuck on the side of the arena upside down. And once the Lawnmower of Chaos's weapon was offline, it had no way to self-right, which led to a countdown and a knockout. Yeah, in terms of damage, this was the armor band that I used in that match. And the reason why I said that I was a bit ambitious attacking the robot is it didn't look like I was taking a lot of damage. Drive belts came off, but that happens all the time. 2 of the wheels were also completely destroyed, which I kind of was aware of it, but it didn't seem like it was a really bad thing. I did notice afterwards that the back of the armor almost got split in half there. That's not supposed to be like that. And there were a few other things along the robot, in particular this weapon support that's missing in the moment. That also almost got destroyed, but I didn't realize it. So that weapon did a lot more damage to me than I was aware of during the match. I probably shouldn't have been so willing to just charge into it, but I did. And, well, in the end, it kind of worked out well for me. And that's why I managed to get 1 win in this tournament. So my third match then was up against a robot named Poison. It is a vertical spinner. He has a 3D printed nylon body. I think I asked him about it at a different competition that I just wanted over to watch. On paper, my goal was to not charge into his primary weapon. For some reason, it just seemed to happen a lot. I got flipped over at some point during the match. He eventually flipped me back over. It became a bit of a back and forth, pushing, maneuvering, driving match. Not a lot of visible damage was done to the robots. Key phrase there, visible damage. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And the entire match ended up going the full 2 minutes, which turned it over to the judge's decision. And I have never won a judge's decision in robotic combat, and that continued with this match. And I lost, as the announcer said, in a very close match. That was probably pretty accurate. We both did kind of just nicks and scratches in each other's armor from what it seemed like. So therefore, the judges really wouldn't be able to tell if some robot did more damage than the other. There was nothing visibly wrong with either robot. Weapons were intact, drive was all intact, all that fun stuff. So it was kind of a toss-up there. Aggression was back and forth a little bit. I think I was doing a little bit better job of pushing him around. I had him pinned for a few seconds, and I backed off because his blade was dangerously close to my robot still. And like, you know, let's just get out of that area. I think in the end, though, it probably came down to the fact, at least if I were judging the match, that I got flipped over by his attacks. Once, then he self-righted me with his attacks. And that is probably the one deciding factor in terms of giving him control of the match and therefore giving him a slight win. The reason why I said there wasn't any real visible damage is because there's actually some real serious damage to my robot, but you really couldn't tell until I opened this thing up. If I hold this guy up here, this side of the weapon has no weapon support to it. I mean, it survived intact. It functioned as a weapon support throughout the poison match. However, it was completely shattered. There was other noticeable damage from poison. I had some scrapes to the armor here. And then he also got, I believe this is probably him, one nice hit to the chassis that was approximately 6 millimeters away from the battery. That could have ended in a bit of a fireball, but it didn't. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the overall design of the robot, what worked and what didn't. And in terms of what worked really well, there was one thing that stood out, and it was this armor band that I kind of designed into the robot. This is about 1.5 millimeter thick UHMW, and it, you know, UHMW works really well for taking hits, but the exact material isn't super important for the armor band, it's just what I'm kind of used to using. Its main function was that it served as a bit of an air gap, so that it kept the enemy's weapons ideally about 6 millimeters minimum away from most of the chassis, as well as any key components. And well, in terms of counting things up, there's approximately 15 distinct weapon hits on the armor band, and there's only one that ended up going through to the chassis, which is really good, which basically meant the armor band did its job. And also, the advantage of having the armor band as a separate piece that's bolted on versus some robots where essentially they just have some extra 3D printed material as part of their chassis is it's relatively fast if it needed to be replaced in between fights. It's a matter of a few minutes to replace the armor band, whereas if I had just a pure chassis, I'd have to take all the components out, and that's a much longer replacement time. Now, going into the competition, I knew that my weapon was going to be underpowered. I just had no idea how underpowered it was really going to be. I did essentially no damage to anybody. I probably scraped a few things, but didn't really remove any pieces off robots, or didn't even send any robots flying at all. I kind of popped up Lawnmower of Chaos and kind of flipped the robot over, which was good, but, you know, in terms of vertical spinners, there's a lot more deadlier ones there. So, I've already got a slightly better solution for the next version of the robot in the form of a fairly beefier weapon motor, but we'll be talking more about that in the future episodes as I rebuild this robot. I think, though, in the near future, I'll probably keep the same kind of mini drum thing and just see how that works with a more powerful weapon motor. Now, the other problem I ran into was just the general flexibility of the chassis. The flex in the chassis is not huge, but the problem is when the robot's just sitting on the ground with its wheels, it actually pushes the sides of the robot up and in a millimeter or two, which doesn't sound a lot, but that can cause issues with the drive system where it's rubbing against the chassis or the lid or something like that. And it also then causes the front of the weapon to sag a little bit, so the weapon's actually sitting maybe a millimeter or two lower than it should be sitting, which effectively reduces the maximum weapon size I can potentially use. So therefore, it is important that when I redesign this chassis, that I do make it a little bit more rigid, and therefore less flex. Good. Also, the flex causes trouble with the drive systems because the flex where the drive motors are and the flex where the idler casters are is different, and it causes a little bit of misalignment between the drive wheels and the idler wheels, and therefore that leads to a little bit of an increased chance in having the drive belt pop off just randomly. The other problem related to the chassis were the motor mounts. They don't hold the motors in particularly well. They don't move a lot, but these motors don't got to move very much to actually cause trouble. In the very first fight against Super Space Turtle, where the first drive belt just popped off for the heck of it, what happened is the drive motor just kind of wobbled a little bit and moved a little bit out of spot where it's supposed to be, tilted the drive wheel, and that kind of caused the belt to become misaligned and just popped right off. So I definitely got to do a better job of wrapping around the drive motors in a way that keeps them from rotating and shifting and all that fun stuff. But more about that in a future video. I think that pretty much covers everything I want to say about how the robot performed, as well as kind of things that I learned from this event. And I definitely want to basically upgrade this quite a bit, make it a little bit smaller as mentioned, and get this into another combat event, because that was a heck of a lot of fun going and fighting robots for a while. I hadn't done that in a few years, so it was awesome. So I don't know when I'm going to get around quite to that. We're getting in here in the triathlon season, so you know it's going to be swim, bike, run all summer long. But hey, I'm sure I'll find time to get this robot upgraded a little bit, and maybe, just maybe, get back to work on a micro flash as well, but I can't promise anything. So I'm Jason, the creator of Tabletop Battlefield, as well as Team Rocco Robotics. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.